Hello, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to another video. If you are new to this channel, my name is Frank Zhu, and I'm a college professor teaching sociology, history, and philosophy. I'm also an award-winning landscape photographer. If you live here in America, as I do, you may have heard about the so-called Miranda rights that police officers must recite to a suspect whom they are arresting or before interrogation. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney, etc., etc. These are a set of warnings which originated from the 1966 Miranda versus Arizona Supreme Court case, designed to protect the Fifth and Sixth Amendments against self-incrimination and coerced confessions during police questioning. As required by law, failure to give these warnings will make any statement obtained during the interrogation inadmissible in court. The fact that law enforcement officers must read the Miranda rights to a suspect shows that every individual enjoys certain rights, including a suspect of crime. Protected by the highest law of the land, these rights should not be taken away by anyone, including any type of authority. However, as someone who has lived in America for quite a long time, I know it for a fact that not everybody is aware of their rights, and that these rights are not always adhered to by police or respected by every individual. As a professor, I take every opportunity to raise the awareness of rights and how fundamental they are to human dignity and social justice. Today's video is one of these opportunities. I will start with analyzing the concept of right through a philosophical perspective, and then discuss different aspects of rights and what rights we have in everyday life. For social and political philosophers, whether you have rights or what kind of rights you have is extremely important in their philosophical discussions. First, the recognition of rights is fundamental to freedom, justice, and peace of any society. Only when your basic rights are recognized do you have freedom. Secondly, it is related to our understandings of what actions are allowed and which government institutions are just. If you live in a capitalist system, for example, you have the right to private property. Any action by a government institution to take away your property without due process should not be allowed. Thirdly, it determines what kind of government there should be, what should be written into laws, and what should be considered as a morality. It distinguishes between an authoritarian and democratic government. Finally, on an individual level, rights are not merely passive entitlements, but function as a distribution of both freedom and authority. When a government gives a set of rights to an individual, it is basically approving and providing the individual with a certain freedom and authority. For example, here in America, the constitutional rights allow individuals to pursue goals, express opinions, and act without arbitrary interference from governments or anyone else. These rights include freedoms of speech, religion, assembly, etc. Those rights also grant individuals the authority to make decisions such as voting or demanding the protection by the law. in the early history of philosophy, rights of individuals were not a big topic. In those times, it was taken for granted that only kings or queens could rule because they possessed the so-called divine right, meaning that God had given them the right to rule and everybody else could only obey. The first significant document that granted individuals some essential rights was the English Magna Carta, signed by King John and some disgruntled barons in the early 13th century England. It had a clause that forbade the king from imprisoning an individual at random. However, the topic of rights never took a prominent position for philosophical discussions until Thomas Hobbes and John Locke in the 17th century, who developed a philosophical system of rights for ordinary people. Both of them believed that human beings enjoyed what they called natural rights, that is, the rights which human beings were born with and which are not dependent on laws. But they focused on different core concepts. Thomas Jefferson emphasized the natural right to self-preservation and survival, whereas Locke championed the fundamental rights of life, liberty, and property. Their views were also shared by a famous French philosopher named Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Based on their views of human natural rights, they developed a theory that became known as the social contract theory. In fact, it was Jean-Jacques Rousseau who wrote a book titled The Social Contract, which popularized the concept of rights and the theory of social contract. According to this theory, people gave up some of their freedoms and signed a contract among themselves to establish a government in exchange of protection of their fundamental rights. Thus, the authority of government rested with the consent of people rather than divine right. From then on, the topic of rights became the central point of discussions by many philosophers and prominent politicians. The social contract theory, for example, was later adopted by many other philosophers, including Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers in America. In 1776, Jefferson wrote one of the most famous political documents, the Declaration of Independence, which claims that all men are created equal, and that they are given certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. By the way, it is interesting to note that Jefferson's version of rights changed from property to the pursuit of happiness. Although Jefferson never explained clearly why, most scholars believe that Jefferson didn't agree with the then popular perception that slaves were part of property, which therefore must be protected by government. By replacing property with the pursuit of happiness, Jefferson declared that it is every human being's right to be happy. In modern times, rights are usually divided into different categories. First, there are political and legal rights. These are the rights established and protected by laws. In America, they include the right to vote, the right to express your opinions and beliefs without fear of revenge, the right to refuse search by police without a warrant, and of course, the so-called Miranda rights, as I mentioned at the beginning. Secondly, there are social rights. These are the rights that are protected and upheld by societal norms and customs, such as the right to privacy at school and workplace, or the right to a fair wage. They also include the rights that protect individuals from discrimination and ensure equal treatment under the law. Finally, there are ethical rights. These are the rights that are based on moral principles and values, such as the right to life or the right to dignity. In democratic countries such as America, all of these rights are protected by laws, including the Constitution. But not everyone in every country enjoys the same rights, which brings us to the concept of the so-called universal human rights. According to their advocates and supporters, human rights are those rights that an individual is entitled to simply because he or she was born as a human being. Therefore, regardless of culture or nationality, everyone is entitled to human rights, including dignity, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, ownership of property, free speech, and so on. However, the subject of universal human rights has caused heated debates. One major debate centers on universalism versus cultural relativism. Should human rights be applied globally, or should they be adapted to local cultural, religious, and traditional contexts? Opponents of universal human rights argue that there is no such thing as universal human rights. They see every right as connected with the legal system of a particular culture. Since laws are different in different cultures, human rights vary from one country to another. Another debate focuses on individual versus collective rights. Should the protection of individual rights be prioritized over that of community or collective rights, or vice versa? Still another major debate centers on the tension between respecting state sovereignty and each country's responsibility to protect their citizens from their own governments. If citizens' rights are violated in one country, should another country intervene? Some people, especially those in developing countries, argue that the universal human rights narrative is only used for political gain by the West, or reflect Western biases and mentality. By the way, if you are interested in knowing my position on this subject, please check out my video on cultural relativism. In any case, as I emphasized earlier, an insightful discussion of individual rights is crucial to the well-being of everyone. Once individuals become fully aware of their rights, it provides essential safeguards against abuse and neglect. It helps ensure governments and organizations remain accountable, preventing them from violating personal freedoms. It helps individuals to seek fair treatment and equal opportunities. Most of all, it helps build stable, peaceful communities. Well, I think that is all for today's video. As always, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.